At 3:12 a.m. on a Tuesday, while half the company drooled into ergonomic pillows and the other half doom-scrolled LinkedIn layoffs, Sarah was awake, watching the Category 3 hurricane graze the Florida DR Center. She'd spent 2 fiscal years convincing legal to redundantly mirror in Phoenix. The alert chimed, system reroute engaged, zero downtime. She didn't even blink, just took another sip of cold chamomile and marked the incident contained. No one else would even see the report, which was fine. That's how Sarah preferred it. She wasn't in it for applause, she was in it for stability. For knowing that if the lights flickered in Boston, the Atris backup in Toronto would catch the hiccup mid-breath and keep payroll on track. For knowing that when AWS sneezed, she had a Google failover so tight it made the auditors blush. Sarah had built the company's entire continuity infrastructure from the bones of chaos. 5 regional hubs, 3 cloud platforms, 2 on-prem relics, and 1 emergency playbook that could survive everything short of nuclear winter, and even that she'd gamed out. Her calendar was a graveyard of recurring stand-ups where her mic stayed muted and her name was mispronounced. Her badge hadn't beeped in HQ for 19 months. But every Friday at 2 p.m. sharp, without fail, the sandbox spun up, the test payloads ran, the logs were encrypted, the report went to the compliance vault. She was a system ghost, essential, invisible, and oddly okay with that thing. Most folks in the company knew Sarah as the one in Ohio who sends those scary green spreadsheets. A few of the older IT guys called her Disaster Queen with respect bordering on reverence. But no one truly grasped the architecture she ran. They just knew that somehow when things went sideways, nothing actually broke, and when something did break, he didn't panic. She patched quietly, thoroughly. Sarah didn't do drama, she did redundancy. It wasn't always this way. 15 years ago, she'd sat in a cubicle so close to the server room she could hear fans whining in her sleep. But slowly, methodically, she moved her career away from noise. Built herself a fortress of calm, remote setup, streamlined ticketing, automation so clean you could eat off it. When the pandemic came and half the IT staff collapsed under remote protocols, Sarah didn't miss a beat. She'd already been remote. She was the playbook they copied. Still, no one threw parades for uptime. When things worked, you disappeared. Sarah understood that thing. She leaned into it. She was the whisper in the machine, the one who made sure no one noticed how close they were, always to total digital collapse. When the new government continuity contract came down from the feds, $14 million over 3 years with compliance clause, sharp enough to draw blood, Sarah was the only one who fully read the specs. Not just read, annotated, cross-referenced, simulated 3 failure scenarios, and built a live response environment inside a private hypervisor, so secure not even the CIO had clearance without her. Her only condition: let her run it remote. For a while they did. Quiet approvals, silent gratitude. Sarah was left to do what she did best, keep the company off the front page of cybersecurity horror stories. But the winds were shifting. You could feel it in the language. Less redundancy planning, more cost optimization, less resilience architecture, more streamlining org charts, a new VP here, a visibility consultant there. Suddenly Slack was full of leadership thought bubbles and cross-functional synergy decks. And David, God help them all. David, the guy who once thought HotSwap referred to Tinder settings, was now interim director of infrastructure. Sarah saw the writing. It wasn't just on the wall, it was in the metadata of the all-hands invites. She didn't protest, didn't get defensive, just tightened her documentation, backed up every credential tree, and ran quiet drills in isolated environments. If they were going to forget what she was worth, she'd let the system remember for her. Oh, and hey, before we go any deeper, if you're enjoying this kind of story, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe. I know everyone says that, but 93% of folks don't subscribe, and honestly, that's what keeps our disaster simulations running around here. It really motivates the team. Thanks. Back to Sarah. The real tip-off wasn't an email, was the Slack silence. Normally, after a Friday test, she'd get a thumbs-up emoji from operations, maybe a coffee gift from one of the junior analysts who appreciated how she fixed their undocumented endpoint hiccup. But this time, nothing. Then came Monday and David's voice, smug, too loud, cracking through her earbuds during the Zoom stand-up like a busted HVAC unit. I don't pay people to sit on couches and VPN into critical systems. Sarah didn't flinch, just muted herself. Let him finish. Let him believe. She knew the hurricane wasn't over. It was just crossing warm water, gathering strength. Sarah knew the blade was coming. The second David said, "Let's pivot to infrastructure health." His voice always got weird when he was about to pull something. A tight little smirk, hiding behind a Midwestern salesman draw. Odd had the swagger of a man who inherited his confidence from a cousin in product design and thought redundancy meant buying 2 iPhones. He wore director of infrastructure like a Halloween costume, ill-fitting, sweaty, and stuffed with jargon he didn't understand. "We've done a little internal audit," he said to the Zoom grid, and noticed some, let's say, comfort zone inefficiencies. Sarah blinked once. Just once, kind of blink you do when you know the stupid is incoming and you don't want to give it the dignity of a facial reaction. Then David hit it. "I don't pay people to sit on their couch and VPN into critical systems like it's Netflix for disaster plans." Silence, the kind of silence that doesn't just fall, it crashes. A few nervous chuckles from people with too much mortgage and too little spine. One guy coughed. Sarah didn't speak, a sipped her and tapped her spacebar to mute herself again, just in case her laugh slipped out. David wasn't done. Of course, he wasn't, effective immediately. "We're consolidating admin privileges and reducing what I like to call digital clutter. This isn't personal, it's optics. Investors need to see streamlined teams, lean orgs, not remote ghost admins chewing up compliance overhead." Sarah felt her stomach go cold, but her hand stayed steady. She glanced at her other monitor where her credential ledger glowed softly in the dark. Her name, her clearance level, the master override token tied to her hardware key. She opened her logging script. David kept rambling about future-forward synergy architecture like it meant anything. Then the real blow landed. "VPN credentials will be suspended. Sarah, I'm sure you'll understand. You can use PTO while we revisit RO alignment. Translation: sit down, shut up, maybe take retirement if you're tired of being humiliated." He didn't look into the camera when he said it, just squinted at his second monitor like some spreadsheet would save him from karma. Sarah didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't cry, or rage, or perform the theater David probably hoped for thing. She just nodded once and opened a clean text file titled Revocation Incident Log.txt, timestamp, source, statement, action, witness names. She pulled up her auto-archive script and began downloading every test report, every audit trail, every failover result she'd ever handled. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about clarity. She believed in systems, honest ones. And when people broke them, they deserved to live in the fallout. Take the week. HR messaged her quietly, as if slipping a note to a prisoner in solitary. "We'll circle back, like she was a lawnmower with a bent blade, not the architect of their entire survival net. She didn't answer. She just ran a deep sync from her private Git repo to a local vault. Not company systems, just personal logs, memo drafts, time-stamped approvals. The kind of boring surgical documentation nobody cared about until the fans started spinning with corporate excrement. She backed up her credential chains. Not to break in. Sarah wasn't that kind of ghost to remember what they'd taken from her, because if they ever needed her again, and they would, she wanted to see them squirm, trying to unwind the web she'd built with the Sisters of Arrogance. David sent a follow-up email that night titled Access Review and Role Realignment. It was 3 paragraphs of HR-safe condescension wrapped in fake empathy. Sarah filed it in a folder labeled Postmortem TBD. She did not reply. Instead, she opened a private document and wrote one sentence. "System access revoked by non-signatory on active compliance contract." Then she inserted a bullet list underneath. A quiet little bomb. Legal contacts, audit timelines, names of third-party liaison, and at the bottom a clause from the government continuity contract, one no one else had bothered to read. Continuity Simulation Authority is bound to credential originator unless jointly reassigned via dual-auth protocol, which meant you can't run the test without her. But David didn't know that because David didn't read. Sarah closed the file, exhaled, looked out the window at her quiet Ohio street. Somewhere, someone in the company thought they just saved a few bucks. Maybe he boosted their Q3 margins by deleting an email address. And Sarah, she was fine. They hadn't fired her. Just unplugged the brain from the body and assumed the limbs would keep moving. Funny thing about systems, once you cut the core, all that's left is the countdown. The HR Zoom was scheduled for 8:00 a.m. sharp. Like bad news tastes better with oatmeal. Sarah didn't bother turning on her camera. The HR rep did, of course. Emily with her practiced neutral expression, her corporate therapy voice wrapped in pastel tones. A head tilt that said, "We're being kind," while the email subject line screamed, "Voluntary transition options." Emily began, "This isn't disciplinary. We just want to offer you the space to think about your future here. David's made some updates to our infrastructure road, and it may be a good moment for you to consider your options. A generous PTO balance available or, depending on your preferences, early retirement incentives." Sarah said nothing, just sipped her coffee and stared at the blinking cursor in her open draft email to corporate legal. Emily soldiered on, clearly working from a pre-approved script written by someone who once used pivot as a verb and meant it. "This is not a termination. We simply want to create room while we assess our new operating model. Appreciate your historical contributions truly, but with evolving needs." Well, her voice trailed off like it got lost in the HR woods. Sarah waited for the silence to settle, then she clicked send. Her email to legal was 2 paragraphs. Dry surgical per Section 4 of the Federal Continuity Compliance Agreement, signed on April 4. I remain a listed credential originator for live simulation testing. As such, a reassignment of my role requires dual auth verification and formal board notification. I have not received such documentation. She best herself on a personal account, saved the sent mail as a PDF, uploaded it to her external vault labeled just in case. Emily's voice returned, "Take a few days. Breathe, we'll circle back with clarity soon. Please don't feel pressured to respond right now." Sarah smiled. Not with her face, just with the tilt of her head, like a chess player acknowledging a pawn that thinks it's advancing. She said, "Thank you, Emily," and ended the call. Then she opened her local drives and started the real work. She cloned her architecture diagrams, local only, versioned with timestamps, not proprietary code, just her notes, her playbooks, her mental map of how to stop a cascading failure if the audit team ever ran a continuity simulation without authorization. She backed up every Slack message from the last 2 years. Anytime David sent her an FYI with a tone, anytime she flagged an issue and was ignored, the breadcrumb trail of being dismissed in slow motion. She downloaded the original signed continuity contract, the one with her digital fingerprint hashed into the execution chain, cross-referenced the requirement that failover testing be actively monitored by credential originator or jointly reassigned with written consent. No such consent existed. Of course it didn't. David hadn't even asked. She created a folder labeled Obligation Chain Redundancy Custodian. Inside it, she placed credential revocation logs, timeline of changes to continuity architecture, proof of unchanged credential authority on audit protocol, legal email thread, redundancy failover chain validation receipts, and one final item, a screenshot of her Slack conversation from 6 months ago with the now retired CTO, where he wrote, "No one touches continuity config but you, M. You are the fallback." She knew David wouldn't see it. Not because it was hidden, but because he didn't look. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Sarah didn't believe in lucky breaks. She believed in receipts, knowing that when the roof collapsed, she'd already diagrammed the exit route and made copies for legal. She took one last step that night just before bed. She logged into the contractor audit dashboard, her view-only access still intact, and checked the date on the next live simulation. 6 days they'd left the protocol switch enabled, which meant the system would trigger automatically. The auditor wouldn't know anything had changed. But Sarah did. She also knew this. When the system failed, and it would, someone would go looking for the override. Only she had ever used it. Only her credentials could trigger it. And David had killed those credentials in a meeting filled with phrases like streamlining and legacy alignment. Sarah shut down her machine, listened to the quiet hum of her home server rack in the next room. She wasn't angry. That would come later. Maybe if she ever bothered to feel it. Right now, it was just watching logging, letting the countdown continue. She didn't need to do anything. The system would handle that thing. 3 days before the audit, Sarah received a calendar invite titled Continuity Test Observation Legacy Systems. The legacy part made her snort into her coffee. "Nice touch, David. Dress it up in passive language so it doesn't sound like you're inviting the ghost of Christmas infrastructure past to silently bless your screw-up." He clicked accept without comment. The invite came with a Liati dashboard link, one of her old dashboards stripped of admin controls. She could view real-time logs, incident pings, event tree triggers, but she couldn't touch anything, which was fine. She didn't need the thing. Watching would be enough. David, for his part, was practically whistling through Slack. There was a flurry of self-congratulatory emojis as he posted things like all green across the board. Team's been crushing prep. Grateful for the hustle. He even tagged the VP of Operations in a thread that included an animated GIF of fireworks exploding over a laptop screen. Sarah watched the animation twice, then opened her local failover model and cross-cheated against the activity logs she could still access. Something didn't match. Actually, many things didn't match. First flag. The Auto's escalation module had been rerouted through a new service when she didn't recognize. It looked like a third-party automation tool with a name like a failed cryptocurrency. She checked its O-key lineage. It wasn't validated against any of her original sign-offs. Second flag. Someone had hard-coded a dummy trigger into the continuity protocol, bypassing the human verification step. It was a patch job. Ugly of those just for the demo things junior engineers do when they're panicking and don't understand that simulations aren't simples. Third and most damning flag. The dual auth mechanism tied to her credential was grayed out. Not reassigned, not updated, just deactivated, as if pretending it didn't exist would keep the system from noticing. Sarah stared at the screen, her jaw tight. It wasn't just incompetence, it was erasure. They weren't maintaining her systems, were mutating them, replacing live wires with Christmas lights and calling it innovation, and the worst part, she recognized the names on the change logs. Analysts she trained, engineers she'd mentored, people who once called her at 11 p.m. during a sandbox meltdown and begged for help, and she'd answered every time. Now they were cutting her out of her own architecture like it was a bad tattoo on the company's reputation. Odd had clearly convinced the board that Sarah's way was too complicated, too dated, probably used phrases like technical debt and simplifying oversight. Sarah could picture the pitch deck, stock photos of clouds and bridges, and that one guy pointing at a whiteboard full of fake numbers. A PowerPoint sermon on progress brought to you by a man who thought a rollback plan was something you did to your gym membership. She closed the dashboard, stared at the soft glow of her office, the bookshelves lined with binders she no longer opened, the whiteboard still marked with simulation drills from last year's hurricane season. And for the first time in a long while, she felt it. Not anger, not fear, sorrow. This company had been her scaffolding for 15 years. Not because it was noble or fair or generous, but because it had given her a place to build, poured herself into that network like concrete into a foundation, quiet, solid, meant to last. And now they were painting over the cracks and calling it renovation. She clicked back into the dashboard, pulled one last visual, a real-time flow diagram of the backup execution path. Her backup execution path, except this one had been rerouted through a tool that didn't support synchronous rollback, which meant if the simulation failed, the system wouldn't pause, would spiral. The simulation was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. Friday. She saved the diagram, then opened a text file and wrote, "Failover path compromised via invalid process. Manual rollback disabled. Escalation route bypassed. O deactivation logged without reassignment." Underneath, she wrote a single sentence. "When this breaks, don't ask me why," and she saved it in a folder titled Friday. The audit loomed like a thunderhead. Shell didn't pray, but she did double-check her backups. That was her version of faith. After all, systems are predictable. People, not so much. The email hit her inbox at 7:41 a.m. Subject line continuity simulation. Observer invitation. SME Legacy. SME Legacy. Sarah read it twice, then laughed once, just once, sharp as a snapped cable tie. Body of the message was wrapped in corporate tinsel. Out of an abundance of respect for your historical contributions, we welcome your insights during the live continuity validation. Observer. Access only, per current role designation. It was signed jointly by Audit Liaison, Legal Oversight, and of course, David. She didn't reply. She just clicked the attached link, granting her observer view to the system she built, maintained, and until 3 weeks ago, commanded. The simulation was set to begin at 10:00 a.m. sharp. A live continuity test mandated by the Federal Continuity Assurance Program, Clause 7.1, subsection Crisis Rehearsal 0 Notice. It wasn't optional. It wasn't a fire drill. It was a legally binding moment of truth with penalty fees measured in six-figure hours. Sarah sat at her desk in her Ohio home, slippers on, coffee lukewarm, watching the press-simulation chatter spill into the meeting room feed. Everyone was there. VP of Ops, the CFO, a stern-faced man from audit who looked like he hadn't blinked since 1998. And of course David, new haircut, new blazer. Same shallow confidence, hiding a void where his operational instincts should have lived. He spotted her name on the Zoom participant list, unmuted. I had to smile like this was a team picnic and not a slow-motion train wreck on government rails. Sarah, hey, glad you could join us. We're just finalizing prep, but yeah, feel free to watch if you want. We got it covered. Sarah didn't respond, didn't unmute, just leaned back in her chair, stretched her arms, and repositioned her second monitor so she could track the back-end event pings in real time. They really thought they could wing it. David tapped through a few slides. Arts, traffic flow diagrams, sanitized uptime reports, the usual show pony stuff. As you can see, he chirped to the board. We've actually streamlined several of the older escalation tiers. Makes us faster, more agile, reduced clutter by over 30%. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. You didn't reduce clutter by deleting validation steps. You didn't streamline safety by skipping handshakes. Didn't optimize continuity by rerouting through a vendor plugin with a 6-month support cycle and no rollback key. But she said none of this, just took a sip of cold coffee and opened the live simulation overlay. It looked pristine, too pristine, like a wax apple, shiny, symmetrical, and hollow as sin. The countdown began. 9:59, 559, 59:40 in the bottom right corner. Small gray box blinked quietly. Pre-est credential check pending. Sarah's name flashed, grayed out, flagged, revoked. No backup credential listed. No Duluth key configured. The auditors didn't even notice. Why would they? The system had been edited to skip that part. David's team had built a bridge by tearing out the load-bearing walls and drawing fake beams with PowerPoint. 95,910. David was still smiling, still talking about resilience metrics. Shell caught a flash of his screen. He had the compliance manual open in a second window. He was still skimming it. She switched to the system logs. The trigger protocol was hot, armed, and ready. But instead of engaging the proper rollback sequence if an error was detected, it would now just loop a fail message and wait for manual override, which didn't exist because David had revoked it because she had been the override. 95,903. Her cursor hovered over the simulation log. She watched the heartbeat pings, one from each region. The New York hub blinked green. San Diego followed. Phoenix stuttered. That wasn't supposed to happen. Phoenix was her crown jewel. The desert vault, untouchable. It had worked flawlessly for 4 years, unless they moved the load balancer routing table to David's vendor plug-in. Sarah checked. They had would all fail in under 3 minutes, and not a soul in that room knew it. She sat very still, breathed very slow, listened to the wind outside her window and the quiet hum of her own home server, still running her version of the protocol, unchanged, uncompromised, waiting in the dark like a forgotten firewall angel. Then she whispered, not to them, but to herself. Tick, 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 10:00. The room on Sarah's screen froze for a second. Even the pixels were holding their breath. Then everything blinked. The simulation trigger initiated. Immediately, the Phoenix Vault lit up red. Critical failure. No route to backup authority followed by San Diego. Latency exceeded. Then New York, the supposed crown jewel, rolled over and died with a chirp. Credential conflict, off-chain broken. Sarah didn't move. Her face didn't flicker. Her coffee sat untouched, long gone cold. She just stared as the dashboard. Her dashboard, gutted and reskinned by amateurs, screamed back to life with the kind of urgent clarity no one could now ignore. In the bottom right, a box appeared. Penalty timer engaged $100,000 Hauer continuity breach. Detected protocol 7.1, 3 unverified failover authority. The compliance auditor flinched first. The legal counsel leaned in toward the screen like it might whisper a better version of what he just saw. David blinked once, twice, then fake smiled, like maybe this was all part of the plan. Okay, he said, voice too high. Looks like a false positive. Probably just a handshake timeout. He turned to the engineer at his side, a junior dev who looked like he wanted to dissolve into the carpet. Log into the override, David ordered. Just clear the failed state. The kid tapped then froze. Sarah already knew what he was seeing. She'd built the lockout herself. Override token not recognized. David leaned over the screen, tried the admin master. The engineer swallowed. We don't have it. David's voice dropped. What do you mean you don't have it? The admin credential was tied to Sarah's chain. David's lips moved, but no words came out. The auditor cleared his throat, slow and deliberate. Is there a secondary silence? David straightened, voice brittle. We sunset that redundancy during optimization. Sarah smiled, not broadly, not triumphantly. Just the kind of smile you give when someone finally steps on the rake you warned them about 3 times in writing. CC'd to legal. In the Zoom gallery, the VP of Ops had gone ghost white. The CFO was furiously texting someone. The legal advisor was flipping through a hard-copy contract binder like it might sprout answers. In the center of it all, the simulation timer ticked on. $200,000, $300,000. Try a soft restart of the fallback node. David barked. No fallback node, the engineer whispered. You deprecated it, said it was unnecessary bloat. Sarah could have told them this would happen. She did tell them in documentation, in escalation reports, in her final summary email to legal, which no one had read because it wasn't wrapped in gifs or buzzwords or whatever flavor of synergy passed for leadership these days. David leaned over again, slamming keys like force could replace authority. Access denied, token blacklisted, no valid signature on record. Sarah tilted her head, clicked open a folder on her second monitor titled Predicted Scenarios, David Varance. Scenario 6B, Unauthorized Simulation, Revoked Token Audit Live. Estimated timeline to melt down, 7 minutes. She was ahead of schedule. In the boardroom, the temperature dropped without the thermostat moving. David looked directly into the camera for the first time since the simulation started. Sarah met his eyes, didn't blink, didn't wave. She just opened her notes app and wrote 4 words. The system remembers everything. He unmuted, voice trembling at the edges now. Sarah, would you be willing to help us resolve this? Was the willing that nearly made her laugh? Like this was a favor. Like they hadn't thrown her out of her own machine and expected the lights to stay on. She didn't respond. Let the silence stretch. Let him sweat. The penalty timer rolled on. $400,000. $500,000. One of the board members finally spoke, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue who revoked her credentials. All heads turned. David opened his mouth. Sarah already had the screenshot ready. She screen-shared her file marked Revocation Logs, Off-Chain Severance. Dated timestamped cop to legal. There it was, plain as day. Access revoked per David Hensley, Director of Infrastructure. Re-enrollment. No reassignment of protocol authority noted. No one said anything. The only sound was the penalty timer still ticking like a metronome set to bankruptcy. Sarah sat back, let the silence bloom. He built the system to withstand disaster. It never occurred to her that they would be the disaster. The penalty clock hit $600,000, and the air in the boardroom turned heavy like oxygen was rationed. Legal muttered into separate phone lines. The CFO was sweating through his collar. The auditor refused to make eye contact with anyone, and David looked like a man who just realized he'd been trying to disarm a bomb by hitting it with a stapler. Sarah, the voice deep, clipped, deliberate. It was the chairman. First time he'd spoken since the simulation started. He wasn't yelling. He didn't have to think. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade through birthday cake. Can you explain what's happening? Sarah didn't move, didn't blink, just unmuted her mic. Of course, she said, her voice steady, neutral, almost bored. The continuity protocol includes a failover simulation clause, section 7.1.3 of the Federal Compliance Agreement. She paused, made sure David was looking right at her. It's a dual-off process. She clicked a key. Her screen changed to a document, one she'd preloaded hours ago. Continuity Simulation Authority Matrix. She highlighted a sentence. Manual override requires signature verification from 2 authorized parties, infrastructure director and credential originator. Originator token is hardware-bound, biometric-linked, and non-transferable. Then she turned her camera on, held up her security key. It was sleek, black, unassuming, the kind of thing you'd mistake for a USB stick until you realized it held the fate of their compliance budget in its encrypted core. My token is still intact, she said. but it's been revoked at the system level by David without reassignment. The chairman turned slowly toward David, removed her token. David's lips moved like he was chewing invisible gum. I didn't think she was remote and we needed a lean chain of command, and Sarah interrupted him calmly. This was all detailed in my exit documentation to legal. I sent it 3 weeks ago. Legal's lead, a man named Thomas, looked like he wanted to vanish into his own briefcase. I didn't see it, he mumbled. Sarah didn't flinch. You were CC'd. PDF timestamped with summary bullet points. The auditor cleared his throat. Just to clarify, without the originator's douloth, the protocol can't validate. That's correct. Sarah said the simulation is locked in penalty mode until both tokens authorize a roll back. The only remaining valid token is mine, which is, as mentioned, revoked. The chairman let out a slow, measured breath. He leaned back in his chair and turned his gaze to David like he was trying to decide whether to fire him before or after lunch. Why was none of this flagged in prep? David's voice cracked. We thought we'd streamlined it. Sarah's setup was old, complicated. Compliant, Sarah said softly. Not complicated. There's a difference. The room fell dead silent again. The only sound was the penalty timer. $700,000. $800,000. The chairman spoke without looking away from David. Restore her access. She's not an active employee, David blurted. She's our only option, the chairman replied. Or are you planning to personally cover the next $1 million? Sarah sat very still, watching David's hands tremble as he tried to remember how to revoke a revocation. He opened Windows, scrambled through interfaces he barely understood. It was too late. The revocation had purged the credential path. It wasn't a toggle switch, it was a burned bridge. She needs to be reinstated formally, someone from legal said. Rehired temporarily. The chairman nodded once. Do it.